Hello. Yeah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fabio Sgaragli, and I work for Fondazione Giacomo Brodolini. It is my pleasure this afternoon to open this first section of this international seminar. And I will introduce all the speakers one by one, but we'll start with a keynote introduction by Professor Bastian Lange from the Humboldt University in Berlin, who will introduce us to this new era of participatory planning and co-producing urbanism. Please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, thanks a lot for the very kind invitation to this conference. It's my first time to be in Modena, so I'm very pleased to be here and to get to know the city a bit, you, and the discussion on this issue on urban regeneration. When I thought in the last days, what could I say and what are central drivers in a specific trend of urban discussion, I thought it's important maybe to extend the frame of our discussion a bit and ask what kind of recent changes in urban context take place and what is the relationship between and the changing role of the built environment in respect to the way we work and live and organize ourselves in the city, and how that depends on the social kit, as we say, this type of social collaboration, and what kind of interfaces do we need between the built and the social environment. I consider this question to ask for the social dimension as a very important perspective because in my understanding since 2-3 years, cities are extremely confronted with new propositions such as smart city, green city, and others. The idea of smart cities, I think, are generally very good, highly relevant in respect to the ecological, economic, and other crises, although they are highly driven by corporate companies that try to solve new urban challenges with mainly technological solutions, big data, Internet of Things, and so forth. Therefore, I ask, to what extent new attempts have to take into account the way people organize themselves, work and live together, and create bottom-up, self-organized solution far away from the rhetorics of smart city buzzwords and many other buzzwords that floating around in an urban discussion. So I consider the way how work flows, how knowledge creation, knowledge production has significantly changed due to new technologies as a central thematic resource in order to find out new attempts to cope with social differentiation in the city, as well as with substantial negative effects of post-capitalist globalism. So in my talk, I will demonstrate what urban regeneration has achieved in the last decades and what challenges are waiting for us in the near future. And this work also, and this presentation reflects also a lot of my academic as well as consultancy work, trying to understand socioeconomic changes, also often on the micro level, hidden things, and transferring them in another language to ministries, EU Commission, and corporate bodies. So just a short introduction who I am. I'm running also this, apart my academic work, this Multiplicities label in order to do consultancy work. I publish a lot, we publish books, reports, and so forth. We think ahead, report, and we think and talk in different conferences. Recent projects we have done last year was here a former gas production plant in Augsburg, in Bavaria, where the city wanted to start an urban regeneration process, but simply didn't know what topic is relevant, with whom to talk, so we're initiating a broad stakeholder management process in order to activate this space, first of all. Thereby, we also sometimes using different types of methodologies and maps. This, for instance, is a weather map for a quarter in Berlin in order to highlight specific social resources, interesting places, interesting initiatives. Sometimes very hard to communicate, but the idea of a weather map, so where are high pressure, low pressure, where are conflicts, is very easy in order to communicate complexity to the public. This is another project we did last year. It's in Hamburg, Oberhafen, very close to the Hafen City, an inner city urban regeneration project in 15, 20 years, where a specific type of this place hasn't been developed so far. They want to do it differently, not just for high-income people, but for creative, cultural people, cultural initiatives. And we were supporting these local authorities to bring the people together, to think where they could get spaces and what kind of themes are dominant. So it's a very practical approach, but sometimes it's important to come with a specific background to these issues. We also do reports for the EU Commission in the field of creative industries, but also we collaborate, co-design, initiate prototypes, so we're doing very basic, down-to-earth things. The thesis of my talk is that for the future urban development, I think the design of the urban, its buildings, objects, and infrastructures depend on the design and the functionality of their interfaces. And interfaces can be physical ones as well as social interfaces, for instance, meeting rooms, social crossroads, communities, as well as virtual analog interfaces. My point of departure is to ask where I see and observe new societal changes, sort of sources of newness. So where's the new coming, new people, new initiatives? What kind of mindset do they bring with them when they want to do something together, either in the field of culture, professional work, as an entrepreneur, as initiatives for the neighborhood, or whatever? Where are they? What kind of motivation do they have? And how do we cooperate or collaborate with them as a regional authority, a local authority, when you are developing a site? I also want to point out how these new societal changes are able to reproduce new and also inclusive spaces. The plan of my talk is, first of all, to contextualize and explaining urban regeneration, highlighting a bit the role of culture in creative industries as a driver for cultural-led urban regeneration. It's a mistake, I'm sorry for that. It's not generation, it's regeneration. So I want to raise challenges also that we're facing in recent urban processes and demonstrate a couple of new linkages between socio-economic changes and their respective impact on the built environment and how that comes together. And also will draw some conclusions that allow us to discuss and exchange today and tomorrow when it comes to policy making and so forth. Urban regeneration has long been understood and practiced as mainly an inner city process to make use of buildings from the industrial past or to reuse buildings from former times in order to revitalize them and to transfer them from the pre-industrial or industrial to what we call post-industrial phase in the 21st century. Very often in Western Europe, culture here, culture, knowledge workers and culture offers has been the main driver to qualify new buildings, to make them alive, to bring new functions and atmosphere into the buildings. Of course, there's a wide range of successful buildings that have been transferred for new purposes. I will show you a couple of them. This is an urban regeneration project, the waterfront development in Buenos Aires, very famous. Another rather similar one is in Hamburg, quite of high, expensive luxury upgrading of a former devastated and vacant land. Also, breweries are a very central topic. Here a case in Kansas that is now a kind of cultural temple. Former industrial plants, here in the case of Germany, in Leipzig, a former a Baumwollspinnerei. This is a cotton mill that has been transferred to a gallery space where a lot of galleries and artists are working now. It's even a cultural center now. This is another case in the Ruhr area of North Rhine-Westphalia, a former steel production plant that is now a cultural and design center. I'm missing a bit the people on this image. This is very significant. I will come back to this later on. Also, some of these have been developed to landmarks with illumination, and so very signature and a strong signature architecture, I would say. This is, of course, a very, very selective view I quickly presented. Former renewal projects have started already in the 19th century to qualify, for instance, the urban Paris, or to pave the way for social reforms, such as in London and many other European cities. After the Second World War, many German cities have even been more effective and destroyed due to attempts to planned and systemic attempts to modernize the city and to urban regenerate them in the 1960s and 70s, than to the effects of the bombing of the Second World War. When it comes to attempts to regenerate the urban, we have to critically ask the following questions. First, from a building level, what is an appropriate functional mix to avoid monostructures and dominate users, mainly high-income groups that try to create gated communities? Especially in buildings for culture, exhibitions, art, and buildings with a signature and landmark effect, the icon addresses international audiences but does not meet the demands of the ordinary people from the adjacent neighborhoods. From a planning level, we have to ask how an effective participation process is possible that leads not only to temporary satisfaction of the participants, but to a direct impact of their investments to the final outcome. People invest time, bring in new ideas, very often get the feeling to receive a sleeping pill instead of an effective contribution of their ideas to a specific case. The background is that many regeneration processes have neglected, from my understanding, the mutual will and expectation of the end users, those who at the very end should live there and use the space. And this image tries to demonstrate a bit the distant view of the normal people looking to a city. Top-down planning with an elitist and exclusive professional attitude very often has weakened the social design of a regeneration project and therefore increased social exclusion, gentrification, and culturally gated communities. From an aesthetic point of view and design, many projects have been erected with a lot of financial investment as well as a superstar architecture attitude that provided flair, visibility on a global circus of images and a strong focus on the facade and its aesthetics. I might be a bit unfair and not objective, honestly, to start with a rather critical perspective on the effects of urban regeneration, especially when we open the perspective of the role of the city in the current global ecological and economic crisis that lead to increased migration, social fragmentation, and increasing economic gaps in the city. What I observe so far in many cities around the globe is the following. Social segregation, gentrification, and social differentiation are severe forces to weaken the urban, social, and cultural infrastructure as such. That increases also, here a case of Berlin, communal cost for social repairing. So the negative effects of this process are highly a financial problem, basically, for the communities and the local state. On the contrary, we see a lot of self-organized attempts to reclaim the city spaces. Thinking this observation further, places and spaces for knowledge exchange among different stakeholder groups are becoming more and more important. Is this a do-it-yourself attitude, a fashion of social designers? I think in the last decades, culture and creative industries have been considered, from a positive understanding at least, as a role model to trying to bridge both activating and reusing space with new cultural as well as also creative entrepreneurs and their programs. They are introducing thereby new modes of doing innovation underneath the umbrella of what we call creative industries. But also looking closer a bit in the history, in the very beginning, sort of in the heydays of the 1980s and 90s, that was absolutely not an organized and planned approach. It was, from my understanding, also when you look at UK and other countries, it was completely chaotic. It was fun-driven, but self-organized. Many of these activities in the music and art scenes have led to make vacant spaces lively again and activate them again. Later in the 2000 years, and often till today, these people demand these new spaces and now how to make them alive. But looking closer to these kind of creative milieus today, I observe many new attempts not to be instrumentalized by this buzzword of creative industries, but to contribute with socially relevant inputs, ideas, and investment into the local community. A very current discussion is all about sharing different resources from transportation to other spaces to other symbolic goods. So after the euphoria of culture and creative industries a couple of years ago, I think we have to ask how culture and creative industries still can trigger new social innovation practices. For instance, also the EU, or European Commission, attempts to focus on what they call cross-innovation within culture and creative industries that are aiming at sort of increasing regional cooperation, stimulating growth, innovation, and creating a regional impact. I think what is neglected so far and not fully understood is what type of spaces of innovation can we approach and what kind of practices, practically doing innovation, are taking place apart sort of the super high-tech, exclusive, and high-financed places of innovation. So far away from the idea of culture and creative industries, we observe an ever-growing number of what I call bottom-up initiatives that are aiming at reclaiming space, modes of production, and social resources and practice new mode of innovation. They are attempting of reinventing socio-spatial belonging anew by new protagonists, spaces, and cross-disciplinary modes. That might sound a bit complicated, but I will give you some examples later on. And I think what is interesting to look closer to these micro-initiatives is that there's a degree of self-organization taking place. They're investing a kind of and practicing a kind of micro-policies that, from my understanding, challenges the rhetoric of multi-level policy making, call it cross-innovation, spin-off, spillover, or even creative industries policies. Why are these so important? I think all of these branches and other sectors and our society basically are confronted with extremely significant global challenges in the field of climate, energy, and other types of resources. And I think it's so interesting to look at these sort of fine-graded initiatives because their smallness, their fine-graded segmentation is maybe better adaptable to these trends and expectations because they have specific social and cultural techniques to cope with these challenges and maybe even to create more resilient spaces as resources for exchange, new knowledge creation, and new forms of social cooperation. So I will give you a couple of inspiring cases, at least, that I think lead our way of thinking and communicating a couple of interesting activities. A very interesting global phenomena on a micro level is sort of the co-working idea. People are entering workspaces and activating them by themselves. They only need a power cable, desk, and a very modest pricing system to work, come together, and activate a space. What is taking place inside of these spaces? An interesting phenomena is that a lot of these freelancing people in these co-working spaces are working, for instance, with open data. We'll organize 2 days hackathon. They're visualizing new data, transferring them to other sectors, or creating new applications. So out of this condensed constellation, interesting products emerge out of a 2-day meeting. Another interesting phenomena, what I call open workshops. People are offering techniques to do their own things again. That means designing a t-shirt, designing furniture, and other types of things we need in our everyday life. An open workshop situation, for instance, is also taking place for the bicycle activities. Fixing bikes, repair cafes are places where you can go with broken issues you need in your everyday life and can repair and fix them. So what is also interesting, that new business developments take place when sort of the virtual world and the digital world interact and feedback into the world of atoms. Idea production feeds back into the improvement of the local situation. How do we deal with failed plans, voids, vacant lands? Temporary uses is a very interesting and widely discussed field where you, with reusing material, here in Berlin, the Holzmarkt, where they have used simple wood in order to make an interesting place for a bar, meeting place, exchange, restaurant, club, and so forth. It can also be a bit fancy. Here, this is also a case in Berlin, where a kind of a stapled temporary use has activated an empty plot and can be taken away within 2 days. So it's not a fixed investment into the next decades. It's very temporal and a very interesting cultural space. Last week, I was doing a workshop in a university when a matchmaking situation between local entrepreneurs and designers. Surprisingly, they were not coming together. We were doing something that we call simply innovation workshop by asking what kind of problems do local entrepreneurs have and company owners, and letting the students develop ideas and pitch them on Friday 1 o'clock in front of the companies. That also increases the exchange between local entrepreneurs and companies and local design students, and sort of intensifying a place here in the University of Applied Science in Schöneweide. Another interesting resource is sort of urban gardening, widely discussed. It's sort of leveling social disparities. Another activity temporary uses is in a case in Bochum where they had a lack of communication places, and they were sort of erecting this kind of strange, simple garden houses, I would say, in order to meet also when it's raining and cold, and have a public space where you can raise your issue and engage with others. Another interesting case is I observed in Café de Sevel in Amsterdam, where a polluted brownfield has been transformed to a very clean playground, and where also a kind of reuse mentality took place. They were using the local abandoned material, have erected a small coffee shop, a kind of pop-up coffee shop, and it's a very interesting, accepted places in communities. It's cheap, it was quick, it can be removed quick, so no one is too serious on it. But those who run it also make a bit of profit, so it's a fair game, I would say. Another important issue when you look at this fine type of new producers is where do they distribute their individual goods? And I think what is also very interesting to observe, that out of these communities, sort of individual production is creating new fairs, maker fairs or whatever, where sort of things that have been produced in the urban are also disseminated with a local fair in order to, well, work against a bit the global commodity chains in its negative side effect. This is an interesting case in the Maker Fair in Rome, where I observed that sort of new interesting products are exposed, tested.
Professor,
yeah.
Your time is almost up.
Okay, I'm running through it. Okay. Another interesting idea is to look at, is this case in Essen, an unperfect house. Very important issue to look closer. A type of renovation hasn't been perfect or to be done perfect and can remain for a period of many years in an unperfect stage. That also allows and says a lot about how to activate and think and transfer spaces further. Microfinancing is a complex issue, but I think it's highly relevant in order to allow also new financial models and not just await for either the local state or other sources of financing. Basically, what I wanted to say is that looking closer at this co-production bottom-up perspective, I think we see a lot of social resources that take place in small spaces and that allow us to address new sort of outcomes of these sort of milieus and groups and to work with them instead of just for them. Thanks a lot.